right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Gary Katz. I'm a Senior Account Executive and Solutions Director here at MarkLogic. And today's session is on whole person care and the search for the golden profile. This is kind of a big moment for us at MarkLogic because we have some very robust capabilities to be able to figure out who's the right person or who's the right entity. The challenge, of course, is that we're really good at data and getting that data right, but we're not typically the end user application. And we brought our partners at Merative to join us today to talk about how, if we can get the data right, what does an end user application look like that actually gets to leverage and benefit from this better, more highly curated data. So with that context, I'm joined today by Liz Schnitter of Merative. Liz is the product lead for Merative's Integrated Care. And again, I'm Gary Katz, Solutions Director and Senior Account Executive. We're going to discuss briefly, the challenges in data management with social programs, discuss the pairing of MarkLogic and Merative together and the solution that we've brought forward. And then we're going to go and actually walk through where the rubber hits the road. We're going to show tangible examples of how this actually works, so that you can take a peek underneath the hood and get a sense for what this really does. We're scheduled for 90 minutes. We will not go 90 minutes, so no worries on that front. Okay, so a very quick tidbit. For those of you who are familiar with MarkLogic, we have been in the insurance and healthcare space for a long time, but we very recently were acquired by Progress Software back last month on February 7th. That closed. We actually had a nice thank you message up on the NASDAQ board in New York City, which was pretty cool. Progress Software is the trusted provider of the best products to develop, deploy, and manage high-impact applications. This is a tremendously good fit for MarkLogic because that is exactly what we do. MarkLogic presents itself typically in highly regulated, mission-critical industries. And combining with Progress's portfolio, there's a lot of opportunity for further investment. Progress acquired MarkLogic for $355 million, which is a testament to the work that MarkLogic does, and also a testament to Progress's investment in the organization and the product for future growth. So we're very excited about this. I'm going to toss to Liz to introduce herself and Merative.
Thanks, Gary. We're going to ping pong back and forth a little bit to keep you guys on your toes. So Merative is probably not a name that many of you are familiar with, but you might be familiar with Currem, a social program management software that's been around for more than 30 years. You may have heard of IBM, who owned us for about 10 years, and we were part of Watson Health. And it was just 8 months ago that we spun off to start a brand new company called Merative. We were purchased by a private equity firm. About 3,000 employees rolled out of IBM to start this new business. But it's all the same software, the same teams, the same engineers that built the original solutions, and 30 years of experience in social programs supporting state and local governments, also expanding into payer and provider space. Merative is a made-up word that our marketing team came up with about a year ago, but we like that it has the Latin root of merit, the importance of having accurate, reliable data. We are a data and analytics company that works on delivering improved healthcare and social programs for individuals to drive better outcomes. So fundamentally, we are all taking active steps to work on supporting the communities that we serve. And if we think about the challenge that Merative focuses on, and part of what also MarkLogic focuses on, is we have a real challenge here in our industry, right? We have fragmented sources of data. We have information about an individual across payer, provider, government, life sciences spaces. No one has the full story of everything you need to know about an individual in one place. It makes it really hard to understand all of the challenges, the strengths, the needs that an individual has. Even if you could put it all in one place, getting the data sharing agreements and permissions and consent forms to be able to combine all that information, and then having technology that can help you make sure that only the right people can see certain pieces of that profile. Not everyone has equal access to all the data in the database. So all of those challenges put together We need solutions that can help us put the person at the center. It shouldn't be about the silos, about the different agencies or divisions, about the community partners having some of the story, governments having the other part, that in order to be able to provide real personal care that looks over a longitudinal life of an individual and some of the challenges they faced over time, to have the right insights at the right moment to be able to care for that individual, you need reliable data in order to do that, and you need it at the care team's fingertips when that person is standing in front of them, when they walk into your office, when they enter a food pantry, when they call up the Medicaid offices. You need to be able to deliver the right interventions at the right time. So that's part of why Gary and I are so excited to be here and talking to you guys about how our two solutions can work together to better support those individuals. And so this is kind of the summary of what I just shared with you here, but we feel that our joint solution is a superior solution that provides reliable, timely, high-quality data so that we can deliver social program management that enables care teams to deliver better, more effective, person-centered outcomes. One more page here, and then I'll pass it back to Gary. So when you think about our solution, this is an IT conference, so we had to have something that looks a little bit like an IT architecture up here, but nothing too technical. So if you imagine on the left-hand side a secure cloud environment, you've got the care management solution that sits there. It needs to be configurable, mobile-enabled. It needs to deliver you analytics and deliver strong business intelligence. It needs to have a really user-friendly workspace for the caseworkers, social workers, nurses, care teams out in the field to help those individuals. You need kind of a holistic summary view of all the data of the person in one place. You need a way to engage with the individuals in the community, so the person actually receiving the services. And you need a way to engage with the providers as well. So you've got care team members, admins, reporting users, community-based organizations and providers, and the clients, the citizens themselves, all logging into a place that has shared data, all driving towards shared outcomes. But you'll see there on the right that typically you've got various data sources. And I used to have like a list of 12 in that box there on the right. We simplified it for the sake of the visual, but really you've got data, social determinants of health data, lab data, health agency data, provider data, pharmaceutical data, payer-provider data, housing data, juvenile justice data, and it's all scattered, right? And so ultimately, what you need is a way to integrate, to pull in the critical pieces of information from all those different places into a golden profile of that individual and surface it in the care management solution so all those people logging in can work together to help the individual. So lots of lines and bubbles on this page here, but a pretty simple concept. Consolidate the data, make sure that it's telling you the right story, make sure that it's accurate and current, and get that into the hands of the people who need it. And I'll pass it back over to Gary to explain a bit more of what that looks like.
So I'm actually going to go back one slide to where Liz just left off, just to highlight one point. We've talked to a lot of folks in the industry for a bit, and there's generally two kinds of customers, right? There are customers who really want to be hands-on with their own data. Those customers really enjoy MarkLogic. They really get into it. They see the power of what MarkLogic does, and they can realize they can interrogate their data in a multitude of different ways and arrive at the answers that they're looking for in ways that would just be astronomically harder using conventional methods. But then there are a lot of other customers who also say, I really like the power of MarkLogic, but I really want to be able to use the value of the data that comes from it at the end user level. And that's not typically where MarkLogic has catered towards. The beauty of the solution between Merative and MarkLogic is that we can cater to both. For customers who want to be able to get into the data, you still have the ability to go and do that. But for customers who want to leverage the benefit of having the end-to-end solution for the end user, right, for the caseworker and the caregiver, for the person in the social services agency, you have the ability to get the best of both worlds now. And that is really the value of what the solution brings together. So with that, I'm going to do a quick deep dive into the what and the how of how we get the data right, and then we're going to pivot back towards what the solution looks like. What MarkLogic is really good at is getting the data right, because we have a capability that allows for us to bring on any and all forms of data, consume it inside of our data hub, and then make that data accessible and discoverable. So think of MarkLogic at a very high level as a combination of a very robust, ACID-compliant transactional database, tremendously scalable, that is inextricably tied to a metadata-sensitive full-text search engine. So the second that you put something into MarkLogic, the very next transactional cycle, you can start asking questions at that data sight unseen. We'll have indexed everything. And the more you begin to understand your data, the more you can start to ask it more specific questions. And that is the value of when we throw in lots of different data sources. If you're talking about cross-program data from SNAP or TANF data, if you've got Medicaid data that you want to be able to go and throw in there, if you have law enforcement data, if you have medical records data that might be being passed over, you can start to try and bring all of this together, because you don't need to know up front, what do I need to make my Uber profile or my Uber schema look like? MarkLogic takes care of that part for you and makes it accessible to you at the business application level, and I'll show you how that works. So when we talk about this concept, we're talking about data first, right? Oftentimes, everybody talks about prioritizing data, but a lot of times there's so much systems work that needs to be done in order to make the applications work right that data winds up being a necessary but perhaps secondary component. With MarkLogic being able to take care of the data discovery and being able to throw whatever data you want inside of it, you can actually prioritize the data up front so that you can start to understand what's in front, what you're looking at, and what those connections might be, and then start to iteratively develop your applications thereafter. And this is what allows for us to be able to complete projects up to 4 times faster than the way that we would do it before. And I'll talk about that in a bit. So up front, when we talk about data first, if I'm going to give a one-slide snapshot of where we fit within healthcare, the MarkLogic Data Hub accepts any and all data sources. Think of us as a combined, from a Medicaid perspective in particular, operational data store combined with master person provider index combined with EDW capabilities where we can push data out to BI tools and reporting capabilities. We support interoperability through our accelerators. So for instance, for those who are interested to ask questions of MarkLogic using the FHIR standard to comply with the CMS interoperability rule, we've released out a FHIR accelerator that sits on top of MarkLogic so that you can start asking questions of MarkLogic using FHIR. For us to go and do that was actually very simple, by the way, because in order to comply with FHIR, you need to do things like fuzzy matching. MarkLogic always has had fuzzy matching as part of its search and querying, so we just made an open source capability that plugs into the Happy FHIR server. You can start asking FHIR queries of MarkLogic and getting those responses back. When we say MarkLogic was built for the enterprise, we've started with the hard problems up front. High availability, disaster recovery, tremendously large volumes of data. MarkLogic is the back end of healthcare.gov, both the marketplace as well as the data services hub, providing sub-second response time on all of those queries in what was known as one of the largest data integration projects in the U.S. government. We are the back end of large insurance institutions, large banking institutions, certainly have a federal presence in our defense and intelligence environments where you deal in lots of different types of data of tremendous scale, but need to be able to have all of those mission-critical auditing, high availability, disaster recovery, and government-grade security built in up front as opposed to bolted on. So in short, coming out of the weeds a little bit, what is MarkLogic known for? We get data in, whatever kind of data that is, whether it's child welfare data, whether it's SNAP, TANF, Medicaid, child support, data exchange data. We are very adept at bringing in new and unforeseen data sources. Unforeseen being a key term, because oftentimes when you get a new data source, you need to start remodeling what your Uber schema looks like in order to accept it. That requires a surgeon's touch in order to do that. Here, we take away the surgeon's scalpel, if you will, and we just sort of accept it as is, and you can start slowly bringing that into the larger fold of what you're doing. Getting the data right. So just getting the data in is one thing, but then being able to iterate on that data and make it fit for purpose, if you will, to improve the quality and how reliable that data is, to be able to deduplicate data, to master the data, are all things that the hub implicitly does. And then once you've got the data right, to be able to expose that data out into any number of flavors that you might choose to use it in, whether you're pushing it into a caseworker and management tool, whether you are pushing it into reporting tools or BI tools, whether you are doing information sharing. Oftentimes information sharing is seen as problematic from a policy standpoint, overwhelmingly because everyone's got their own fiefdoms and they're afraid to go and share their data because the second that they share it, it's out of their purview. From a MarkLogic standpoint, we actually believe that we facilitate sharing through security because the data is secured at the data layer, not the application layer. So the only people who can see that data at any given time are people who had been given privileges and access to do that, regardless of who originally had contributed that data. And we'll show an example of that in the demonstration as well. So this is about as technical as I'm going to get, in terms of what the data hub itself looks like. So if the previous slide was the business view of getting data in, getting data right, and getting data out, then this is the same view from a technical perspective. On the left-hand side, we're bringing data sources in. In the middle, we're getting data right. We'll be able to leverage metadata, reference data. We can have, the uniform security that's built straight in. And then on the outbound side, we can ask questions and interrogate that data in any number of ways for use within applications or specific API calls. So, if you didn't have a data hub, what would you do? This is my second time at MarkLogic. First time I was here early on, I had hair, I had a youthful appearance, I was full of energy and life. And then I went to an upper right-hand quadrant, data integration leading vendor. Lost all my hair, lost my youthful spirit. Had kids, that may have had something to do with it as well. But I came back to MarkLogic when I realized that all the things I was doing in order to pull these different tools together, all the acrobatics I was doing when I was the CTO of the national security group of one of those large vendors, was a tremendous amount of work to stitch all of them together. They were different code bases. They were difficult to align together. If you put in a hot fix for one, it may have inadvertently impacted one of the other tools, and you had to go and pull that out. You had to have different skill sets in order to manage those different tools. So even though it was from one corporate family per se, it wasn't necessarily the same people. It was effectively just lots of different product vendors all in one. That became really expensive for customers. That also became a bit of a Franken architecture. There were capabilities that were bolted onto the core component of it that just weren't normal fits, and that added complexity. And if I'm the person who's responsible for making this work in the customer environments and I'm having trouble keeping on top of it, then you can imagine that the challenges that my customers were having trying to keep on top of it themselves. So what brought me back to MarkLogic was the fact that this was consolidated into one platform, one code base that does all of these different things and simplified the process of getting that data in, getting that data right, and getting it out. By way of example, we had, in my immediate prior life, it would take probably anywhere between 12 and 18 months before we got to an initial operating capability with a mastering solution, because it required getting the data connectors, getting the data quality tool, getting the ETL tool, getting the lineage tool, getting the underlying database that stored the master records, getting the identity resolution tool, getting the data governance tool, getting the alerting tool, and then the security layer on top of it. That's 9 right out of the gate, different product capabilities that had to be folded in together, right? It took 18 months. With MarkLogic, we went from 0 to initial operating capability in 4 months with one of our customers. And it's because, and that's with one data source. And then in the subsequent 30 days, we were able to add in an additional 8 data sources, and everything worked just fine. And that's because of the way that MarkLogic manages data. So, with that, let me jump to a demonstrative capability here. I'm going to hit Apple. Oh, hit escape. Right? And then... Okay. Everyone can see this on the screen? We can? All right. So this is an interface into the MarkLogic Data Hub. I'm going to log in as Dr. Smith, who is a highly privileged user, right? And when I log in, let me get that out of the way there. The first thing that we see here is this is called the concept modeler. This is where a business or a data steward defines the problem that they're trying to solve, right? This is not a tool that requires DBAs and developers in order to set this up. MarkLogic takes care of the underpinnings of that on the back end. But really, it's a set of relationships. Entities represented in circles, and relationships represented by directed lines. So you can see I've got a member that I've defined in my HHS model. I define all the properties of that member. Members are related to themselves because they have dependents. They're also related to claims. Fire claims have claim items. I went a little too far. Claim items have providers and so forth. So I basically map out what are the relationships between the things that I'm bringing in from the different data sources that I'm looking to solve, regardless of what those data sources look like. Then what I have in the middle here is what we call our integration tab. This is basically our flows that are a sequence of processes that allow for us to run steps to improve that data. So I might choose to do my normalization steps if I want to go and take a full name and break it into a first name and a family name, if I want to be able to upcase everything, if I want to be able to perform the mastering capabilities, and we'll see that. These are where that step is done. This is the get it right component of the demonstration, right? Let me hit play. There we go. So I can see, whoa, I think I jumped way ahead in the video there. Sorry about that. Okay, we're running? No, now we're running. There we go. Okay. So I'm loading in Curum data set. I've got an MMIS data set. I'm showing here's where I can do effectively run little macros that go and perform the data quality. I can see what that looks like on the right-hand side as I perform the operation so that I have an idea of what it is. And now, knowing nothing more than the fact that I've loaded data in, and I've mapped it to the model the business model that I've defined, I can start to look at the relationships between those different data sources. So here I'm going to hone in on a particular person, within the graph. Again, I've done nothing more than load the data in and simply map it to the model that I provided, and I can start exploring the data. Just a note, this is for the data steward or the business steward, not the end user caseworker who's looking at this, but this is how we manage the data and start getting insights there. So I can look in on any one of these nodes, I can expand it and say, hey, I have a particular individual that I'm looking at, they have a claim, those claims have claim items, I can go and look at the individual pieces of this and expand out this graph. And I can query this graph in any number of ways. This is all fine, well, and good. However, now I'm going to hone in on a particular individual that I want to go and look at. So I'm going to search for somebody named Drindy. Now when I look for Drindy, I'm going to see, zoom in there, I've got multiple different flavors of Drindy. And I know this is a little hard to see on the screen, so I'm going to verbalize some of this, but I've got 3 different Drindys in here who are spelled different ways. I have Drindy with a Y on the end, a Drindy with an I on the end. I have a first name and a last name transposed. And Drindy has relationships to these people named Nuno, and when I explore this, I see that they've got different socials and different birth dates, but the same address, so they appear to be different people. So I've got like 3 individuals there. And now I'll look for someone named Mohammed. And when I search for Mohammed, I'm going to pause here. I know that folks on the screen can't see this as well, but maybe folks who are looking from home might be able to see it better on the recording. But I've got Mohammed spelled in a multitude of different ways. I've got Mohammed spelled Mehmet. I've got Mohammed spelled, with a U, with an O. And I've got this one dangling Mohammed on the end who is different. And that dangling Mohammed has a different social security number, right? But it's off by 1, whereas the Nunos were completely separate numbers. The dangling Mohammed, if you will, is potentially a typo, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into, I think I jumped to the demo earlier than I should have. I'm going to jump into my mastering scheme, right? And as I jump into my mastering scheme, I've got 2 steps. I've got a match step and a merge step. On the match step, I'm trying to figure out for the domain I'm trying to fit, what candidates do I have who actually look like they're in fact the same person, right? My merge step, I'm going to decide once I found my match candidates, which ones do I want to assign into the merged record? This is important because I may trust different data sources differently based on the application that I'm running. So I might trust, for instance, the financial information out of my banking system more than I trust financial information out of an HR system, right? Because one of them has a higher fidelity or veracity of the data. Whereas I may trust the name information that's in my HR system more than I trust it from a CRM, because I know that the HR system's probably going to have it right for tax purposes, right? So my match and merge steps are done differently. And I also have thresholds. Thresholds for merging and thresholds for human review. So, I'm going to jump right in. We're going to click, let this go through. And now I've merged these together. And now, when I click on Mohammed, I see that I have one Mohammed who's here, and not, and I've lost my dangling Mohammed, but I brought them all together, so I have one consolidated record. Noteworthy that even the one that was off by one on the Social Security number was still merged incorrectly, because when you're evaluating, who's the real person that you're looking for, you don't want to look and rely too heavily on any one attribute like Social Security number. And when I go back to Drindi, which I'm going to go back to here, if I could type correctly even in my movie, there we go. I see that I have one Drindi appropriately merged, and I also have one Nuno, which is wrong, because note that I've got Nuno Jr. and Nuno Day. So I made a mistake there. Now, mastering's not always perfect, right? So the question becomes, what do I do to break those out? Now, for anyone who has done mastering before with other tools in particular, when you find something and you merge it together and then suddenly you need to break it out from where it came from, that can be a painstaking task to get that done correctly. Sometimes it requires one of their specialists or maybe even a PhD in linguistics in order to set up the rule to de-merge that. In MarkLogic, we've simplified this by just saying unmerge. And that is as simple as it is in MarkLogic because of the way that we manage the data. For us, we just break it back out, take out the bad one, remerge the remaining ones that are good, and now you've got your correct records again, and then it works. This is unique to the MarkLogic approach. You may not have noticed that there was a notification that popped up in the upper right-hand corner there, where after we ran merging, some things got flagged, because there was also, you may recall, in the merge step, the match step, there was a human review tab. So that's sort of the close but no cigar scenario. So what this allows us to do is preemptively get in there and look at candidates to say, hey, we think these look like they're the same people, but we weren't sure enough in terms of our figure of merit. So we put this back to the human in the review, the data steward or the business steward, to make that decision. So you can see every red row is where the data was slightly different, and then we see on the far right hand what that merge preview actually goes and looks like. So this is all very, very simple for the data steward, business steward to be able to use. We can explicitly merge it or explicitly block the match, which is what we did. Now we can go back, we can search for Jonathan, or Pelteheller, sorry, and we'll see that we've got our one Jonathan Pelteheller there, and look, we could just go and unmerge that all the same as well. We'll unmerge it, and now we've got them broken out the same way that they were before. Pretty fast, pretty easy. All of this data is great, but what if you're not highly privileged? Like we're looking at this from the perspective of Dr. Smith, who basically can see everything. So we've got another candidate here, Mr. No PII, aptly named, who can't see PII. So when we go back in and we look for Drindi under that profile, we see a lot less data, which is to say, when we search on Drindi, we know that there's Drindi there, and in this case we did an extreme example where we just say, oh, there's someone there, but you can't see any of their stuff. We could mask that data in any number of ways. What's important here is that these are the same queries that were run, exact same queries. Nothing changed in the query in order to redact that. It's just simply, this is what was returned back at the data layer based on the permissions of the user who was logged in who asked that question. So security is built in from the ground up within MarkLogic, and it's very sensitive to the PII fields as well, which we can, out of the box, denote, and you can further denote within your application for other fields that you might feel are sensitive. So great, we've got data. Getting this data is great. Using this data is better. So we can show here, as we're looking, you can see, we're looking inside of Power BI right now that's looking directly inside of MarkLogic at this data. On the left-hand side is your pre-mastered data. On the right-hand side is your mastered data. There is less of the mastered data than there is the pre-mastered data, which is generally what you would expect to see. That's the whole point, to be able to curate that set into who the real entities really are. And then we can also look at other views as well. We can look at this from a program integrity perspective to see, claims by diagnosis codes or claims by providers, see if there's any anomalies that are there. But now you've got a better data set to work with. I'm going to go back to my presentation because I missed a very important step of this, I realize. I can't believe I did the demo first. That's okay. We're going to go back to here. And I want to show another capability here that we didn't discuss, although I'll move through it quickly because it's worthwhile. We showed, I already went through truth and trust. Basically, truth versus trust in mastering is important to note because we discussed the trust factor. I have certain data sources I trust more than other data sources for particular match and merge strategies. Truth is basically trying to figure out for a particular application which candidates do I want to put forward. There's an adage that says that the only person who knows who Bob Jones's mother, who the real Bob Jones is his mother, right? Beyond that, the rest of us are just stuck figuring it out. So let's run through a scenario, and by show of hands, let's just go and do a pop quiz. We've got records here, right? Name, place of birth, year of birth, doctors, doctors effectively, providers, dentist, another provider, university, college major, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior addresses, year of graduation, employer address, another address out of college, and another address thereafter. These are two individuals. The question I asked to the room, would you merge them or would you not merge them? So by show of hands, in this scenario, who would merge these records together? If you're going to merge them, raise your hand. You would merge. If you would not merge them, raise your hand. If you don't want to participate in the quiz, raise your hand. Okay, there we go. All right, so in this scenario, this would be a maybe, right? We've got two folks who are both born in the same year. It sort of looks like they're in the same area. They're both in Bucks County. Jeffrey and Gary, linguistically, right, if I were to use like a double metaphone or Soundex algorithm, those would actually come out pretty close together. They are potentially twins, right? That's the idea. These could be twins or these could be the same person, right? Maybe they're twins living together. Is that a corner case? You betcha. But is it equally possible that it would fail mastering? Yes. Okay, quiz 2. Same properties, 2 other people. Give you a moment to review. All right, if you would merge these two, and it's probably worth noting that Bucks County is a suburb of Philadelphia, by the way, for those who don't know Philadelphia geography, which is probably everybody at a national conference. But nonetheless, if you would merge, raise your hand. If you would not merge, raise your hand. Yeah. Okay, so I would agree. Don't merge these two because these are probably 2 people with the same name who are a few generations apart. Their birth years and their graduation years are equally apart from each other. It's not impossible that you'd have 2 people in the same area who have the same name, so that's okay, right? And everything else about them is different, so I agree. Don't merge these 2. All right, last quiz, and then I will stop playing games with everybody. Last one, this should be pretty straightforward. Would you merge these or not? For those who would merge, raise your hand. For those who would not merge, raise your hand. Okay. Yeah. Social Security. So, Social Security number is helpful, but not always right, and you should look at other areas. But that said, yes, I purposely removed Social Security from these guys as well, which definitely would have thrown this out. We're not allowed to hack my presentation, folks. That doesn't work this way. All right, so with this, we would not merge. Now, I know that folks are probably a little surprised about that, but the reality of this is, you see, my best friend and I have the exact same first and last names. And we both grew up in the same hometown. We had the same doctors and dentists growing up. We had the same set of friends, but we did not know each other directly. We both went to Penn State. We were both assigned the same dorm building, 1 floor apart, which is why the floor in our freshman year was off by 1, because someone in housing probably had a sense of humor and stuck us in the same building together. We were the same major, same senior design project. We both worked at Lockheed together. When I left Lockheed, he was the backfill in my group. So yeah, I've got a doppelganger. And what do we take away from that other than the fact that I'm completely replaceable? It's that linguistic identity resolution unto itself isn't necessarily enough. And if you think that I'm an extreme case, by the way, I saw something last week while preparing this presentation that there's 2 other guys in this country who are not only identical in name and everything else, they've all played baseball and they've got the same name and the same everything, they look exactly alike as well. This came through my feed on one of my pieces. So which is to say, I'm not the most extreme case that's out there. There are others who are worse. And just by way of example, this is me and my family, slightly dated version, but in the event of my untimely demise, we have backup photos, so I've got a warm backup ready to jump into my family life at any moment. Now, why would we put this up here, though, aside from the humor value? It's that how could we have done better on this? And the way that we could have done better is if we looked at relationships, right? Now, in a Medicaid and health perspective, relationships matter. Who's claiming what dependent? If you have family structures that are not, conventional families, but you've got homes with divorced families and you've got, one parent who's claiming a kid versus another, and you need to be able to tie all of it together. These relationships are essential to what you do. And if you can use relationships to ask questions of your data, to say, hey, these Katz guys, they kind of look like, they're the same person, right? But if you looked at that over time, right, and over geographies and over employers, you'd start to see that we diverge. There's a part where we're definitely overlap, but then we've, kind of moved into different areas. He's in Baltimore, I'm in Virginia. He moved on to other employers, I moved on to other employers, and our social networks even changed because it's different when you're in college versus you're 20 some odd years out of college. So this is a unique differentiator with MarkLogic's approach to being able to figure out who's the right person. When I talk about asking questions and querying data to get value, I don't say we just query it in multiple ways. I say that we interrogate the data because I feel like that's what we do. We have lots of different lenses, graph-based, temporally based, geographically based. We can use all the linguistic fuzzy matching as well to come up with a match strategy that actually helps iron out those corner cases that do present themselves more than not. If they didn't present themselves, mastering wouldn't be hard. It would be straightforward. It's because it doesn't always get it right that we found a way to solve for that in a better, smarter way. So this is the part where I was supposed to show the demonstration, so I kind of did it backwards. And with that, I will turn back over to Liz for the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
All right. So what Gary just went through was the views and the interactions with the data on the back end. And he suggested, caseworkers aren't going to log in and play with the data in that way. What I'm going to focus on is what your front-end users, the caseworkers, the social workers, the care teams are interacting with, as well as the community-based organizations. Before I jump into all that, just curious, who in the room is a vendor? And who in the room is a state or health government employee? State or local healthcare focused? Okay, great. Who's staying at the hotel and wandered into the wrong room? Okay, we've got a couple of those. All right, so who in the room, whether you're vendor or government, has been working on programs where you're supporting high-risk, high-need, vulnerable populations in the community? Most states, most counties have programs in place for a variety of cohorts, different types of populations, whether it's maternal health, juvenile justice, the folks who are unhoused, people with mental health or behavioral health needs, right? The list of the cohorts of people who need our help is long. And so what we wanted to talk about here is kind of the broad case on how we use data to help those populations. And so our solution, the integrated care solution, is intended to help empower the care teams, the caseworkers, the social workers, the nurses, the mental health specialists, the housing specialists, and the families and individuals they serve to work with the community to make sure folks are getting the right services, the right support to address their needs. The solution needs to be configurable to address the variety of programs that you're supporting. It needs to be responsive, so you need to be able to access it from mobile devices if you're out in the field visiting those individuals in their homes. And it needs to be flexible. It needs to be able to scale with you as you grow to be able to support a variety of programs. And so rather than talking about the technology to start, I'd like to start with kind of a fictional use case of an individual. We've spent a lot of time talking to our state and county customers to understand who are these residents that they're providing services for. And so I've got Mary Brown here, and you can think about who's the Mary Brown in your community, or Mark Brown, depending on who are the people that you're working with. And imagine that there's this individual. She's a single woman. She's in her 60s. She lives in an isolated rural community. She's unemployed. She didn't go to college. She has a limited skill set. She also can't afford to have a car, so she's dependent on her neighbors. She doesn't have access to transportation for doctor's appointments, to pick up prescriptions, to go into town to pick up her groceries. And she does live with her adult son at the moment, but unfortunately, he uses substances and has a tendency to be violent. So not only is she isolated, but she's depressed and anxious, living in a very tense, unsafe home environment, dealing with a couple of physical health challenges as well, like COPD and chronic arthritis. And so you see the social determinants of health and clinical factors all kind of coming together. And this is what we're talking about, understanding the whole story of what's going on in Mary Brown's life. And rather than going into town to find a doctor, she has trouble. She's embarrassed to ask friends for rides. She self-medicates with alcohol. It's something that she has easier access to than going into town to the pharmacy. And she ends up in the emergency room often. She's a high-cost, high-need utilizer in the community. She's someone who has a lot of different needs, a lot of different government agencies kind of have various touch points with her, and she needs support from a lot of different angles. And ideally, you would have a care team like this surrounding someone like Mary, someone like a community health worker, someone who's looking at getting her more stable, safe housing, not living with her son, a therapist who can help her work through some of the anxiety, a family doctor, someone who's primary care to keep her out of the emergency rooms, and someone to help her get employment and feel more engaged in the community so she can get her feet on the ground and be more independent. This is probably a case study of someone who you might be familiar with in your community. It could be a completely different case study. It could be a 16-year-old, and they could be in a violence prevention program. We have customers who are trying to reduce gang violence and help children find a better path to being independent, keep them in school, get them employment after they graduate from high school, but keep them out from running with the wrong friends. And so depending on who the case study is, we'll focus on Mary for now, but keep in mind whatever program is near and dear to your heart that you're focused on, it's a good reminder of why we are all here and why we do the work that we do. So when we think about our solution, we have 3 different portals, and we talk about holistically caring for Mary. The portals intend to provide that. So there is a portal for Mary to log in herself, to empower her to be able to manage her own care. So she has contact information for all those people on her care team. She can share the login with family members. She can view her goals. She can mark actions complete. She can send messages to her care team. She can upload attachments if there's a new prescription she's been assigned and she doesn't know if she picked up the right one. She can also search for services. So not that she's sitting there waiting for the community health worker to tell her what to do. She can actually be proactive and go search for services on her own. And then in the lower left, we do have a separate portal where the community-based organizations, those providers, can log in. They can coordinate with the care team. They can post services that are available, descriptions and prices and location and contact information. They can keep that information current so that the database of information about services is all in one place and accessible by the care team, the community health workers. And last but not least, the team on the lower right, that's the holistic care team. That could be a housing specialist, a mental health specialist, the social workers, all logging into one place, viewing all the data that MarkLogic would be piping in for us, mastering the data, making sure that it's reliable, making sure that all the various sources have been checked out to ensure that we have the most current information about Mary and all of the different places that she's getting services currently, whether it's from the community organizations or the various government agencies. And so what does that process look like? How do we actually help Mary? So we think about the care management process in kind of these 5 steps more broadly. And so you need to identify the individuals who need help. So you have this master data with all of the populations that you serve. You could run analytics on that and be able to pull out the highest risk, highest need individuals who you'd like to focus on. You register those individuals in the integrated care solution. You're able to pull in information from various sources. You can assign them to different programs depending on their needs, and then you start assessing what help they need. You start gathering information. You run assessments and questionnaires. You start pulling in various pieces of data. You identify the gaps in their care and where they need help, and you start gathering insights on what this individual needs to help them out. Your response plan is essentially where the care plan and the actions are all defined, right? So you set up a set of goals for Mary, you define all of the different actions that Mary has to take and the actions that the care team has to take to help her as well, and you start searching for community service providers. You search the registry to make sure that there are actually organizations that can help her with all of the different gaps in her care. The active management piece then is pretty self-explanatory. You track progress, you document notes, you make sure that you're adjusting the care plan depending on what she needs, and you start adding and removing people to her care team depending on what she needs over time, as those will likely change. The last but not least, the measurement step is important. So in order for the state to continue getting federal funding and various sources of input, funding input, they need to prove that this program is effective. And so at the outset, there should be a step where everyone is agreeing and defining what is the outcome that we're trying to improve, what are our KPIs, how are we going to demonstrate that we've actually made a difference for Mary Brown's life and all of the other individuals in those cohorts. And then let's make sure right from the beginning that we're building reports that can actually show that every individual that we've enrolled in this program, that we've moved the needle for them. And so I'd like to share an example here. It's our favorite case study, our favorite customer. So Sonoma County in California was one of our first customers. We've been working with them for almost 6 years now. And they had some really inspiring leaders on both the business and IT side who worked together to form the ACCESS program, which stands for Accessing Coordinated Care and Empowering Self-Sufficiency. And you'll see in yellow, I've got the health services block highlighted. But what they did was they essentially came up with an agreement across those 5 different organizations to share data and have one common consent form that when an individual was enrolled in a program in any of those 5 buckets, that the data would be shared. Because what they were finding was those individuals were walking into each of their doors separately, and they weren't communicating with each other, they weren't able to coordinate services, and so they formed a multidisciplinary team that represented health services, human services, community development, justice, and child support. And by sharing all of the data across those buckets, they were able to open doors for people. So the no wrong door kind of policy meant that you could better provide pathways to self-sufficiency for those individuals. These were the highest risk, highest need utilizers in their community. The data, the importance of integrating the data, I mean, that was foundational, right? So the care management solution would not be effective without having the right data in it, which is why the mastering of the data is so critical on the front end. And that I will say that you really need to make sure that you have executive alignment to achieve this kind of cross-agency collaboration. Giving you a couple pieces of data here on the impact that they were able to drive. So I talked for a moment about the importance of setting KPIs. Sonoma's been really good about this. So they started small, and I mentioned it's important to have a scalable program, right? They unfortunately have wildfires in Sonoma County all the time. You guys see it on the news. They had, as we were starting our project with them, they had 77 individuals who were complex needs and homeless due to a wildfire, and immediately used our program and the multidisciplinary team concept to get 34 of those individuals into stable long-term housing and to get them the additional services that they needed. And from there, they grew. And they said, okay, great. So we were able to help this wildfire cohort. What's next? Let's look at emergency rapid response. Let's go send folks out into the field, the social workers, to talk to people who are living in homeless encampments. Let's work on mental health diversion. Let's go to the emergency departments and focus on our high utilizers. COVID-19 hit. Let's help the individuals who have complex needs who are impacted by COVID-19. And the list continues to grow. Now they're looking to help young people who are kind of graduating out of the foster care system. Some of our other customers have expanded into Black maternal health and juvenile justice. So I share that with you to highlight that the state can choose certain high needs populations and then grow from there. The numbers on the bottom we're really proud of. So it's a year old already, so more than 6,500 people have been helped in Sonoma County using this program and our solution. 85% of them have gotten the required social services to improve their lives. 72% of them got housing, and there was a 32% decrease in the cost for the emergency room high utilizers. So if your state wants to show real dollar value and why we should be investing in these programs, that's the kind of stuff we need to be tracking more. Every time we invest in a tech solution, we're all here for an IT conference, we can prove real tangible impacts, not just improving people's lives, but in helping the county to better use their resources. I'll give you one more example before I dive into a quick demo. This is an organization named Aspiranet. They're also based in California. Both of my examples happen to be California today. So they're focused on transitional aged youth. So these are 18 to 26-year-olds who've graduated from foster homes. They also focus on individuals who are in residential homes. So think about a dorm room environment where the highest risk young people are living all together with 24/7 care. They had a challenge where they needed a tool so that all of the social workers who were interacting with these youth could track their notes and be able to support them over time, as over like a course of 5 or 6 years, as these young people are looking for employment, finding housing, getting driver's licenses, opening bank accounts, getting those foundational services and support that they need to be productive members of the community. And so they were able to start tracking improved school enrollment rates and a reduction in the number of incidents that were happening. An incident could be something like an arrest or a mental health episode, or leaving their place of employment. So there were a lot of process improvements put in place by them being able to use one consolidated place, all the data available for the caseworkers who are working to support these youth. It was a shift in how they think about caring for these individuals, and it saved the coaches a lot of time, was the feedback we got from the users. Okay, let me show you what the solution actually looks like. That was a bit of a preamble before we get to the actual visuals here. And let me go full screen. All right. So imagine we're back to our Mary Brown story, right? Imagine I'm logged in as a social worker. This is my homepage. This is where I can see all of my appointments for the day. I can see on the left-hand side any tasks that I have coming due. I can see any alerts. So maybe there's an emergency with one of my clients that I need to address first. I can click into any of the bubbles there on the right, the clients that I need to help immediately. And from that homepage, we can actually click in to see my clients and register anyone new. So let's say Mary's just walked into my office. There's a simple step for registering her as a new client. We always recommend you search first to make sure she doesn't exist in the system. Let's not create duplicates. I'm sure MarkLogic could handle the duplicate, but let's avoid it if possible. And once you register her by filling in some basic required information, you can actually go on to the care planning process. So you can determine what information, you can configure what is required and what is not required, and you can choose what you want to refer her for. What's the program or care that she requires? She needs housing. Most urgently, she needs stable housing. And so from this view, the client summary view, now we've gone into Mary Brown's profile, you can see all the action happens from this page. On the left-hand side, you've got demographic information, and in the center, you have these white cards. I'm sorry for folks in the room. It's a little hard to see on the bright white screen. Those cards are all configurable. So let's say your program is focused on juvenile justice. You can adjust it so that you are surfacing the data that is most important for your users on this homepage. You'll see across the top, you've got access to the care plan, to the various programs that Mary might be involved in, to sending her a message, to viewing all of the data that you have on her, to seeing the history of all the interactions with Mary, and to viewing who else is on her care team. If we keep moving through the demo then, from this page, the first thing you'd need to do is make sure she's enrolled in a program. And you click the plus sign there, you add the program, and you can assign her. This is all pre-configured information. You can assign her to the Community Information Exchange, which is what this customer uses for finding housing. Once you save that, it's going to update your summary view. And when you go into the program directly, it actually launches a set of pre-configured assessments. And so you'll see there on the left-hand side, you've got 3 different buckets. We have about 70 assessments already set up in our solution, but you can configure whichever assessments you might need based on your programs. And as you run through and fill this out, you'll save a history. So let's say you do a depression or anxiety screening once a month with Mary if you are providing her ongoing support. You could go back and see her progress over time by viewing all the historical results of that assessment. And as you're going through, the questions are adjusting. It's changing what the follow-up questions are based on your answers. And one of the things that's most important about this questionnaire and assessment process is that at the end, when you click Save, it's going to take you to the care plan where there will be some automatically generated actions. So what we know about these social workers is they're swamped. They're probably understaffed. They have way too many cases to help. And those individuals might miss something. So if you go through and ask a set of questions, you know, how many times a week do you drink? Do you have a safe place to live? It could be that the social worker forgets what one of the answers was and forgets to add something to the care plan. So what we want to do is make sure that if there is a set response to any of those items, we want to auto-suggest and pre-fill the care plan with those actions. And so I'll show you what that care plan looks like right now. We've clicked on the plan tab at the top there, and the plan is pretty straightforward. On the left-hand side, we have all the goals for the individual and any barriers that they face. And on the right-hand side, we have any services that we're setting up for Mary, as well as actions that we want Mary to take and actions that her care plan needs to, her care team needs to take. You'll see that there's some automatically pre-filled items in here. We know that she is food insecure, so we have automatically enrolled her in a nutrition assistance program and given ourselves a reminder to provide her with educational materials on improving her diet. Just an example on how we're trying to save clicks and keep the social worker out of the tech and interacting with Mary. But of course, there will be things that are not pre-configured, that the human-to-human interaction is going to reveal some additional needs. And so you can actually click on the top there on activities and search for other things that Mary might need. And so one thing that we've identified that she needs in addition to nutritional support is transitional housing, something to get her out of living at home with her son for now. And so we can go through and fill out that information as of a certain date. We need space for her. We save that. It gets automatically added to her plan. So there's the auto-generated actions and then the ability to manually add actions as well. And so now you'll see on this plan, transitional housing was added at the top of the list there, but the provider space is blank. We haven't identified where she is going to be sleeping for that transitional housing. And so the important next step for the social worker to take is to click Add a Provider. And so this is a capability that we're pretty proud of. So this is an integration with Google Maps. It's an ability to see anything that we've added to the registry, all of the providers in the community, all surfaced on one page. You can actually search and filter based on keyword, based on location, based on proximity to Mary's house, or maybe if she's moved in with her daughter temporarily, you can change the address and redo the search. And as you're searching for these locations, it's helpful to know if there's public transportation available. The Google Map provides us that through the integration. And as you widen the search to 15 miles out, you see that there's a lot more options for her. Remember, she lived in a pretty isolated rural place, but in this example, we're here in South Dakota. If we focus on Sioux Falls, in the downtown area, there are many more transitional housing options available. And so down the left-hand side, you see all those options. You can choose to shortlist any organizations that you think are a good fit for her based on their descriptions. I'm adding 3 here. And from this shortlist, you can actually then send an inquiry, a request for support for those services, a referral essentially, by clicking on the shortlist button and creating the inquiry. The nice thing about this step, guys, is that you don't have to make 3 different phone calls or send 3 different emails or generate 3 separate requests through the system. It's 1 click. You have the description about Mary submitted. The 3 providers all get an email telling them that they have a new request for support, and it has all the information about Mary that they need right there when they log into their portal. Saving people clicks, saving people time. The social workers can reach out to multiple shelters in 1 shot. And so we're just filling out some of the basic information about the inquiry here. And as I mentioned, when we submit that, an email is generated. I do want to give you a sense, though, of what Mary will see when she logs into her portal. And I believe that's my next screen here. So let's swap over and pretend we're Mary. So Mary's portal is called Connect. It's a very simple interface. You'll notice compared to the Care Team application, there's a lot less going on. But it has the basic information that she needs. So across the top, she can either click to find services, so she can search the registry herself. She can shortlist items that she wants to talk to her care team about. She can send a message and any attachments to them. And then if you scroll down the rest of the page, you can see actions. She can mark things complete. She views all of her goals, any services that have been added to her care plan. She can search for those services, view care team members at the bottom there. And she notices that transitional housing hasn't been sorted out yet. So she actually clicks on, I want to see what providers are available in my area. And that's going to pull up the same database that the care team looked at as well. She can see that there are already 3 at the top there that have been shortlisted by her care team. And she's curious, you know, I haven't heard of this Pettigrew Heights apartment. Let me click on that one and see what they're about. There's description of what services they provide. And then she is now empowered to have a conversation with her care team about this transitional housing option. I mentioned as well that the providers have their own view. So now I'm logged in as Pettigrew Apartments. So I am the provider now. This is the 3rd and final portal. You can see across the top that I've got this homepage that has the list of all the inquiries or all the requests that I've received. I have information about my organization that I can update and maintain and keep current. I can update information about the services that I'm delivering. And most importantly, from this homepage, I can respond and view all the information about the request for Mary Brown's transitional housing here. I can confirm what day I have a bed available, how long that bed is available, if there's a rate associated with her nightly charge. And I can update information about my organization here. What we wanted to do is create a place where the providers and individuals and the care teams can all separately work and collaborate together and have access to the right level of information that they need to be effective. So just to close it out on the closed loop referral, we're back here as the care team members. We're looking at Mary's care plan, and we can see that transitional housing here now has Pettigrew Apartments confirmed. The provider has accepted. Automatically, the system will send a decline to the other 2 organizations that we asked for help. And we have Pettigrew confirmed. We can track, we can update progress, take notes, and adjust that provider as needed. Mary can also see in her portal that Pettigrew was confirmed. So that's it on my video. I hope that was helpful in seeing how we help organizations to collaborate using reliable data to support their communities. And I think I'll pass it off to Gary to close us out.
Thank you, Liz. So I hope that for those who have seen MarkLogic in the past, that this was something new and exciting. For those who've never seen MarkLogic before, I hope you found something new and exciting. The Merative application is only as good as the data that it uses. And similarly, the MarkLogic data is only as good as the application that's using it. We have had lots of folks in the past look to say, how do I leverage the benefit of MarkLogic, right? But without having to be everything on MarkLogic. And this is a solution to do that for social program management. And we're very excited about our partnership with Merative and everything that it brings to bear. We're looking to see that grow, and we hope that this is a mechanism by which the community can actually embrace and say, hey, we see where this is going. We can get the best of both worlds. We can be hands-on with our data if we want to, but we also have an application that is geared towards our caseworkers, towards our social workers, the end user, that we can leverage at the same time. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions. I know that there's a gentleman, Stephen, in the back who I think has a microphone somewhere. There he goes. He'll run it around to folks, and we'll go.
Yes, Jim May from Dallas, Texas. We don't believe in health care in Texas, but I'm here anyway. One of the non-Medicaid expansion states. My question is, because there are a lot of agencies that would find this fascinating beyond belief. Who do you market to? How do you get, what's your approach? And I'm assuming it's all of the above. Do you start at the state level and work down? Do you start at a local, one participant in a team like Sonoma, and then let them pull to the other folks and sell up? I mean, the sales cycle's got to be ridiculous.
My boss would say the sales cycle is too long, yeah. So who do we market to? Depending on the state, it depends if the funding is pushed down to the county and local levels to execute these programs. And depending on the state or county, these kinds of programs might be housed in differently named agencies. So Health and Human Services, it's Health Services in Sonoma, it's Public Health in Houston. Our buyers are any state and local government agencies that have programs in place for vulnerable populations. That could be a housing division, it could be juvenile justice, and expand. That's right.
You don't start with Sonoma, 5 agencies all together
unless they're ready to do it, which actually in the case of Sonoma County, they had an agreement across their leadership team across the 5 agencies to share data. And so we started with all 5. But with a specific population that all 5 happened to be helping at the same time. Just they were doing it in a very disparate way previously, and they all agreed that there had to be a better way of delivering services. So you're right, it's a different answer depending on the state, depending on the county, depending on the agency. But ideally, it is a joint IT and business initiative where they're looking for ways to combine data from various sources to better serve their population.
Hi, that was a great presentation, both of you.
Thanks.
I'm Sharon Hockenberry, Integrity Data Solutions, and my first question is for you, Liz. I have 2 questions. On the intake form for Mary Brown, was that search before create, was that dynamic? Because I know you had mentioned that you want to go out and check to make sure that Mary Brown wasn't out there, and there could be 3 or 4 Mary Browns that are all legit. Was that dynamic or?
So what we do is we would enable a link to MarkLogic to search for Mary Brown across their solution to make sure that she didn't exist. It would bring back all of the Mary Browns, including addresses. I think there are 4 fields that it provides. So then it would give the social worker an opportunity to say, I think it's this one, or I think it's that one, or you know what, I better just register a new Mary Brown because this doesn't look like her.
Good,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that your customer with Sonoma Valley or whatever, that they had one sharing agreement Because imagine, like, if you keep wanting to go and get other services, imagine how disappointed you get given the same information over, and then they end up just rescinding. You know what I mean? So, and that trust framework is broken, I think. So I love that idea.
You know, we talk about that, we call it avoiding re-traumatizing the individual,
that's exactly
right?
what it is.
Don't make them tell their story over and over again.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And then Gary, I had a question for you too. With the mastering, the cleansing and the master data and everything, we were talking about your example with, let's just say, John Smith and Johnny Smith, and then you look at the date of births and everything. Mm-hmm. Is it easy for you to household families living under one address? Like, how easily can you do that? Because that's huge too when you have multi-generational families with one address, but you can have junior and senior, and then the wife, and then the mother-in-law or whatever, all under one household.
The answer is yes.
Awesome.
So the demonstration we saw was actually built off of a scenario that came from a customer during COVID, no less. Mm-hmm. Right when COVID hit, we'd been working with this customer, and COVID hit and blew everything up, but we were working on what was in front of us. So those requirements were actually there. So there was a third scenario in there that I didn't have in the video that was fictitiously the George Foreman family. Right? Yeah. George Sr., George Jr., George the Third, George the Fourth, George the Grill, and all of them under one household, then being able to figure out.
That in the demo.
Right, well, timing. So we are able to discern all of those things. And the way that you would do that is that when you interrogate the data on the match strategy, you would look, one, at the suffix, if it's provided. That's not always there. But then you would look at things like Social Security numbers. You would look at the dates of birth. You would look at, the Nuno and Nuno Jr. actually was that scenario. We just didn't elaborate on it quite to the extent of the George Foreman family.
And you were able to logically group them into a quote-unquote, a household. Can you do that?
Yes, we can. In fact, for another customer, we actually had to run a very similar scenario to be able to go and show, can you isolate the household? And in that scenario, it was about really who was claiming Medicaid. So that was, who is claiming what dependence on Medicaid. So we've done that.
Because even a caseworker looking into that, they're like, well, yeah, no wonder this kid is having nightmares. Like, there's 12 people living in this 2-bedroom apartment. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. When you look at the householding data. Thank you.
Oh, surely. Great questions. Thank you.
How you doing? Mike Griffiths. So I had a couple of things. First, I was wondering, because in the title it said Golden Profile. And here you use golden record. And the reason I bring that up is, I've been working in Medicaid for about 24 years. And, I find it hard to get a golden record, mm-hmm. right? Specifically because you got children and families that have a record that has an address that's a little different than yours, street, suite, whatever. Mm-hmm. In the Medicaid system, in the core claims, you have another one because the claim came in with something different on it, right? So achieving the golden record is hard because those addresses might be different across the pieces. So I was hoping that, and I think you're talking about it, right? It's really a profile.
Yes.
You're picking two, bringing them together, but you're not necessarily changing the data from the different sources.
That is
so to me, it's almost more like you're talking about a profile. And this is just my distinction, right? Because I saw in your title, I was like, oh, profile, you're going to go that direction, because record just 25 years, and I still can't get a golden record.
That is a great question.
We can go across the states for TMSIS.
Yep.
We can go in a state. We can go to a local county. Like you said, you had to get all 5 to agree to share the data. Oh, but would they change the data? Right? Because I like street with an ST and not the suite with a, spelled out or whatever.
So that is a spectacular question. I'm glad you asked that. I have a habit of calling it record and profile interchangeably, but there is a difference. And in MarkLogic, the way that we organize the data is fundamentally different because you don't necessarily just land at one conclusion. We do create the golden record, which is when we choose a merge strategy, we're going to make a choice about, when we have that one record, what do we put out there to the public? Like, if they're going to go and, public meaning public agencies or other agencies you share, not within your org, but those who are consuming it, right? We will make a choice, and by we, it's really your strategy, right? Your choice on which one you choose to put out there. But you also have the history of all the variations of that have changed over time. We don't overwrite, we don't erase. We have all that original data that came in there so that when you look at the profile, what you saw on the demo was, and we showed this just with the name, just for simplicity's purposes, where you had like Drindy with the I, Drindy with the Y, Day, Drindy. We showed they're all collapsed together. You could query all of them. You could get the full view of it. But we do need to make a choice when we merge together at the top level, one of them that's there, but you can still query all the subdata that supported it. We don't remove that, and that is fully accessible to be queried.
Can you do it also based on who's querying? Like, so if DCF queried our data, you know, the eligibility section queried
Yes.
it one way, and they want their street to show up versus suite. Would it
Street versus suite.
You know, like
You could,
a suite versus if you spelled out suite or not, you know, the two different addresses, because it takes 30 days for them to change the address in the other system.
so the answer is yes. There's multiple ways to skin that cat. I actually just had this conversation last night. Someone asked a similar question, and there's a few different ways you could implement that depending on who they are, what you return back to them. That wouldn't be so much like a security policy, which is what we showed there, but there's a way to be able to say, based on, you know, who you are, we could store it in multiple different ways, and then based on that profile, go and pull that and return that back instead. Yes. Great questions. Other questions?
Thank you. This is also for you, Gary. So when you were talking about security built in at the foundation of MarkLogic, I guess I'm looking at it more from a privacy built in at the foundation. So is consent management, professional agreement, data retraction, all of that built into where if I rescind my consent, do you remove that data? Do you go to your downstream systems and pull that data back? How does the privacy aspect of that work?
Very good question. We are not a consent management platform, right? There are groups that do that, and that's, you know, a whole other line of business. We are the data platform whereby we will comply with the policy that may be agreed to by a consent management platform, but we are not we don't have the application that does the consent management itself. Now, we could re-implement some of those depending on, you know, the level of effort in order to do that for a particular case, but I do know that there are groups that do explicit consent management, and that is not what we are. But we would take the result of consent management and then implement the change therein within the data set from what they would direct us to do. So that would be more of a policy-based thing that on a specific application that would need to be, you know, built into that end. That would be a custom rule, if you will. Great question, though. Okay. Other questions? There. Oh, oh, I'm sorry. We have one other question. Sorry.
There goes his ego.
So this is the part 2 of his question. So primarily, like on the Medicaid systems, if you look at it, it's a downstream system wherein they receive data from multiple agencies. So to prevent duplication of care, duplication of payments, you're more geared towards identity matching versus having a golden record.
Mm-hmm.
So giving an example, if I'm paying Dr. Smith, I want to ensure there's no duplicate payments for that same recipient. I'm not paying 2 Dr. Smiths for that same care. So these are API driven. So do you have some kind of like, you know, process built in, like, you know, based on when you do that unmerged process that you showed, you have an exception table so that before going and trying to identify and rematch the same set of people, there's an exception table that is built in, wherein I'd rather go to the exception table than going through an entire matching process.
So let me repeat the question back to make sure I understood that.
Yeah.
You have an exception table for known folks who you'd rather not run through the mastering, going through the golden record, but instead for a particular name. The question I would pose back to that, and there needs to be an assumption there, would be who makes the choice of whether to go to the exception table and use the value there versus what's in the MPI? Would you be making that, meaning just based on the API that you hit, or would you expect, is the question you'd ask MarkLogic to say, hey, for instance, let's use my favorite example, myself, right, with my doppelganger. I've got Gary Katz, and I want to go and, you know, find out if I've made a payment to him before. Do you want MarkLogic to go and say, we want to look at the MPI and get the value for Gary Katz, or we want to hit this exception table, because if I appear in the MPI and if I appear in the exception table, how I can only do that based on a figure of merit for saying, hey, my inbound query name, let's just say it's Katz, right? If it's close enough to someone who's on the exception list, I can go and use that, and I'd have to forego it. What I can't do is say that the name on the exception list is perhaps better than what's in the MPI, because I'm basically carving around it, right? So I guess it's a long-winded way of saying, yes, we can, but the trade-off there is is the confidence that you have that the value and comparison that you're making in the exception list is the correct list to go to versus what's in the MPI itself, because there is going to be a distinction there.
Okay. I mean, we are running transactions, millions of transactions on financial payments, so I would definitely want to look at an exception before going through an entire list and running a match again. So talking more about on the transactional basis.
Yeah, if there are ways to be able to track the transaction number, meaning if you've got another identifier that's not just a name, but you've got some other thing where it's like, hey, I know that I paid this NPI number, right, or whatever it is, and I want to use that before I go to the the provider index. That's straightforward. You can absolutely go and reroute to do that. It's just where my questions, and maybe this is a good conversation we can take this offline and walk through scenarios too. Mm-hmm. We could explore how to go and affect that if we didn't have something that was definitive or that would overrule, right? These are really good questions. Oh, Kristen in the back.
Hi, okay. I have a multi-part question.
Okay.
So maybe take notes. Okay, so I'm trying to think through, in terms of like embedding usage of essentially like the fuzzy logic, right? Mm-hmm. Probably is something that colloquially might be like an algorithm, right? Where it has like match and then it's got statistics, and so it's, that there's a design behind the rules about what gets matched and merged. And so one of the things when I think about working with such a solution with community members is increasing and making sure that there's transparency in how those rules get made, so that there's not like community fear of the big brotherness of the government knowing everything and consolidating everything. And so I'm curious what is available internally around transparency of the algorithms. And then related to that, we know that a lot of state and government data systems have disparities on ingestion, the flags for services, what data are stored or entered, and how involved different staff people might be. And so I'm curious what practices your various tools have for elevating and encouraging conversations around equity in terms of data storage, data use, and data strategy.
Okay, great questions. Part one of the question is all of the mastering strategies for match and merge are completely configurable. There's no black box. Right? And that's actually a spot-on question, because going back to an earlier part, when I was before I came back to MarkLogic, in order for me to understand the match strategy that my prior in-between employer used for their mastering solution, and by the way, my background's computational linguistics. Like, I understand language matching really well, but I couldn't understand how they were doing it because it was so ingrained in a very specific algorithm that it was indecipherable except to the specialists who worked that product and who understand the underbelly of the product, right? I mean, and it was, by way of example, going into national security, I was the CTO for the National Security Group, and there was a project that was being run at an agency, and in order to get support for that language identity resolution capability, I had to go and get someone from Australia, which, by the way, did not sit well with the customer, but they allowed it to happen, right? But that's how far I had to go in order to get someone who knew how to work it. With MarkLogic, It's all available and all immediately configurable. The weights, the settings, we actually have sliders. You can expose all of that outward and share that outbound. There's nothing proprietary in terms of the secret sauce because it's your strategy that you're implementing for your matching and your merging, right? So there's nothing that MarkLogic does to affect or hide that. We're just codifying what works best for your population. The second part of that question is a little different. There is, at its core, and I'll speak for the MarkLogic side of that question, there is nothing inside of MarkLogic that would disrupt or be counter to equity initiatives. MarkLogic is, at its core, we're a database, and we can provide reporting metrics out of the data store that would support equity inquiries so that you could run queries. And for instance, what we saw earlier in the demonstration with running, BI reporting, by way of example, that could be used, one of those graphs could just as well be used to measure equity based off of different groups and underserved folks to be able to, do comparisons therein. Nothing in the technology would not support equity or would be counter to equity, but the reporting that we enable off of that fully supports equity. Does that answer your question on that front? And I'll turn to Liz on the Merative side for the equity component.
Yeah, so a lot of our customers have actually chosen to use our custom data elements to create their own pieces of data that they specifically wanted to track for their communities. So we do have a kind of set data model that we've created based on 30 years of experience in the social program space. But to give a bit of a funny example, one of our customers said that they wanted to start tracking what color hat the young people were wearing because that could be indicative of what gang they're members of. And that might mean that we need to provide different services or make sure that they go to different shelters or different therapists, that there is no conflict of interest there. And so our solution is actually specifically built to be flexible to capture every piece of data that a state might find useful to ensure equity. Some states choose to capture veteran status or disability status. Some states don't. Sometimes they want to blind that data. Sometimes they want to surface that data to ensure those individuals get better support for their needs. So we are flexible based on what's needed.
That was going to be my first comment. Yes. Okay, so we have one last slide, which is real fast. It is call to action. We are here. We've got a booth in the exhibit area. We have a conference room on the 3rd floor. We'd welcome any further dialogues, deeper dives. These have been really, and I mean this, truly great questions. Like, these have not been trivial questions. This has definitely been some questions I've not heard before. We'd love to explore these further, talk about how our joint solution can benefit your programs, what you'd like to see differently. Hey, can we do this? Can we do that? All options are on the table to that end. I want to thank everyone for attending and for tolerating my lie of not being here for an hour and a half. You were, I'm sorry. And thank you to Merative and Liz specifically for joining us for this session, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you all very much.